I'm expressing my opinions, but what we're doing here is bigger than that. These are conversations that need to be had in an unfiltered way. Drag racing's all I've ever done. It's all I care to do. I respect the history, I appreciate how far we've come, but I want more for this sport, and I'll fight for it. It's uncut, it's unfiltered. This is the show of shows. The biggest names in drag racing. No holds barred. This is the great American motorsport. Drag racing. Prove me wrong. I'll wait. Hey gang, Wes Buck here, Drag Illustrated Magazine, checking in. It is Wednesday, May 17th, 2023. I hope you're doing well out there in the interwebs all around the world. As always, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for helping us spread the gospel of drag racing. Do me a solid, click like, click subscribe, follow along, however you choose, but help us spread the word. Share on your socials. I don't know, send a carrier pigeon to a dear friend somewhere else in the country and remind them to tune in every Wednesday afternoon. We got a barn burner for you. Not shocking at this point. We're bringing the heat 24/7. Longtime friend of the show, longtime friend of Drag Illustrated, the one, the only Clay Millican, going to be joining us in a few short minutes. We've got some lots going on in the drag racing world. The NHRA returning to Chicago for the first time since 2019, which really doesn't seem like that long ago, but it feels like eons. If you're a hardcore drag racer, it seems like it's been forever since Chicago has been part of the lay of the land, if you will. Lots going on in the sport. But before we get any further along, let me introduce you to my cohorts here on the Wes Buck Show, the one, the only Mike Carpenter, JT Hudson, and our co-host for the day, Top Fuel icon, one of the best to ever do it, Clay Millican. What's going on, guys? We got the whole family here.
Man, life is good.
Life is good. What's
up, Clay?
Life is good, right? Dude, speaking of life is good, and I don't know that this was the plan, but I'm derailing everything that we talked about previously. There we go.
That's a new record for derailment.
Yeah,
right there.
Derailment inside of 1 minute. Inside of 1 minute, we're fully derailed. But, you know, talking about life is great, man. It's so easy to dive into like all the things, and there's plenty of time for this. We'll solve all the world's problems here before the show is over, specifically the world of drag racing's problems. But it is kind of cool when we have the opportunity talking about life being good, Clay. Last week, you made a post on social media, and it just so happened that you and I were on the phone. So crazy. We were talking on the phone, and you said to me, you go, you know, today's a special day, Wes. And I said, oh, really? And I'm thinking to myself, May 10th. What's special about May 10th? And I'm looking around, and you go, this marks 25 years since I threw in the towel on a regular job and the real world and decided to go, and this is the really, truly unique part of the story, go nitro racing, go become a professional drag racer. Life's good. You've seen it all. I mean, can you just reflect on that for a minute? I mean, I'd love to hear like how you felt, what happened. I mean, what was that decision like? I try to think about what it would be like to try to explain that to my wife or my family. And it seems like that would have been a tough one.
Well, I mean, the crazy part is it was really my wife's decision. I mean, I had a great job. I worked at the Kroger food warehouse. You know, I always talk about I drove a forklift, but I kind of did everything there. And, you know, man, my whole life story, which we would spend way too much time talking about. I got the opportunity because I became friends with a young man named Peter Lehman to get my Top Fuel license. And when that happened, and the day I got my license, which was May 10th, 1998, Donna said, it's time to quit your job. And she said, you can always find another job, but if you're going to do this, and I know how badly you want to do it, it's time to just take the jump. You know, let's just do it. Let's just see what happens. And to be honest with you, I was nervously excited that she was the one that came up with that deal because, I mean, I'm married. I got little ones, you know, I've got a house note. I got all the normal things that everybody has, but I literally quit my job. And this was without zero encouragement from Peter Lehman, the guy that gave me the opportunity to drive the, you know, a Top Fuel car for the first time ever. And we knew we were doing one race. There was no plan after that. So I tell you what, she's a strong woman because she continued to work a job and was our security blanket for many, many years after that, because I certainly wasn't making no money.
Man, I got to tell you, I love it when it's my wife's
awesome.
idea.
Yeah,
Like, seriously, I mean, it's like the ultimate. Yes, it's
an
yeah,
instant
whatever
pass.
happens.
We're all
This was
good.
your idea, lady. This was on you. No, but that's amazing, and it really doesn't surprise me knowing Donna. I don't know Donna very well, but I've been around her a little bit.
One
Doesn't
race,
surprise me one iota.
One race was how you had commitment for one race, because that blue Warner dragster, man, at the IHRA, we used to show up. I didn't even really watch or concern myself with Top Fuel because Clay was going to win it. You didn't. There was no question. It's just, hey, how'd Clay do? Did he win today? Yeah, probably so. That was the most dominant stretch in IHRA Top Fuel that ever existed, and probably in nitro racing in general.
I mean, I am the world's worst statistician. I'm horrible about that stuff. And I'm always amazed. I see a Garlett sign behind you there, Wes, how he can go in 1971. I ran, I don't have that. I don't have that mechanism.
Me either.
But Mike, you're talking about the Werner car showing up. So that was in 2000. That's when it's 2001. Excuse me. See, I'm horrible at the stat thing. So I went from 98.
Yeah, I was getting ready to ask, like, you're going to have to bridge that gap for us, because we go from one race, not knowing what's going to happen, quitting my job, to, okay, now you've got you've got a trucking company behind you.
Yep. So from 98, May of 98, when I quit my job, I was still bracket racing and sportsman racing, doing the IHRA modified and that sort of thing. And y'all will remember, y'all are all old enough. Remember, we used to get credit cards in the mail. They would come pre-approved with, $2,000, $1,500 or whatever. That's how we were paying our bills, which is stupid. And any 401 and all the 401 that I had, Donna and I, we spent it all. And I was an idiot and continued to sportsman race. And, Peter ended up doing a couple more races here and there. I got the opportunity. I went to Germany and I drove a car for Donnie and Barbara Holbrook. I did that. We did a couple races, with Nitro Fish before Captain Chaos owned it. We raced Reading. We raced Norwalk, IHRA Norwalk. And we also did the U.S. Nationals. Were we successful at any of them? No. I did set a record at Norwalk, though, which was the longest Top Fuel oil down in Norwalk history. We blew it up good enough. We oiled down both lanes. We didn't get one. We got them both.
That's impressive.
So, I mean, it was a big old nasty oily boomer that we had, and I didn't know better. Everything was just fast. I drove that baby to the lights, blowed up on fire and blowing oil everywhere. It was still fast to me, but we literally did without. I mean, it was hard, and again, those credit cards showing up certainly paid bills and paid for gas for me to go sportsman racing, which, hindsight's always 20/20. I should have parked the sportsman car and just totally concentrated on trying to figure out how to make a living Top Fuel racing without having any equipment. I had a friend in Peter Lehman, but he was in college. That was how it all started. He was going to Northwestern, and his entire life, I got to give a little story on Peter. So he was fourth generation that should have run the Felpro gasket company. I mean, his great-great-grandfather, started the company, and, it just passed from generation to generation. And so his entire life was, I'm going to run Felpro, just like his daddy was doing when we met. Well, in that time frame there, before he graduated college, the family actually sold the company to Federal Mogul. And the reason they sold, it wasn't because business was down or anything like that. The OEM side of Felpro was really where the majority of the money was made. And the OEMs were going to silicone gaskets. It wasn't valve cover gaskets necessarily anymore. And so anyway, they sold the company. Now that leaves, young Peter Lehman, what am I going to do? And so he put together a business plan for school of how to go racing for a living. And he came up with a term that I had never heard before that we all know oh too well now, called business to business. And that's kind of how that started. And so he put a deal together in 99 timeframe with a .com company that was going to do something that nobody had done before, which was sell car parts online. Very common now. You know, we all know, you know, whatever, you know, you name it, parts.com, it's out there. So this company had gathered up money and they were spending some of it for us to go racing. And so Peter bought all of the Top Fuel equipment that Tommy Johnson and his family had from the Mopar days. And so that was in January of 2000, I think. But so he buys all this equipment with this .com company, and we decided to go IHRA racing. And the reason we did, it was financially the better move between NHRA and IHRA. They had, you know, 10 to 12 races a year. Let's just call it 10 just because. They had an 8-car qualified field versus 16. They had 3 qualifying runs versus 4. So we all know the easiest way to save a Top Fuel car money is make less runs, period. And so that's what we did. We went IHRA racing, and the first part of the year we had actually had Holbrook on the car. And as the .com company got closer to going live, Peter come up with a deal, and y'all might remember or you may not, but we did stealthsponsor.com is what we did. And we made the car flat black, and we put stealthsponsor.com, and we had big computer kiosk back then to gather email addresses for this .com company.
So far ahead of their time.
Way ahead. Yeah.
Like, holy shit. There aren't teams that are successfully executing that today.
Yeah.
We just started a couple years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly, you know, and so
it's a college kid. This has to be the first story in history of a college kid funding a Top Fuel team.
Who's
your sponsor? Oh, this kid in college.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's an awesome story right there.
It's just crazy. And, you know, we eventually unveiled the car, and it was a company called eauto.com. And, you know, we unveiled the car at Norwalk. Again, I keep bringing up Norwalk, but, you know, Norwalk was the big daddy of IHRA.
That was the spot.
Yeah, you know, it was the spot. And so we unveiled the car there. We ended up winning some races. You know, I won my first race in Grand Bend, Ontario, Canada in 2000. I beat Shirley Muldowney in the final. Can I use the word digress and tell the story of racing her in the final?
Please.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we made our way to the final against Shirley, which obviously is a big deal. You know, you're racing Shirley Muldowney in a final round. And I do my burnout. She does her burnout. I back up, and I notice her just sitting out there. And I got to say that I've always used radio. So I've got earbuds, and I can talk to my crew chief, Mike Klober, at the time. And we back up. We're ready, and they run out there and push her back. Took a while, and they finally get her car back. We're ready to go, and we're waiting. Mike hadn't given me the signal to roll in yet. I'm like, wow, this is, you know, taking a long time. And so I'm on the radio going, hey, should I stage? You know, I think she's broke. I can't see what's going on over there. Like, can I stage? No reply on the radio, none whatsoever. I say it a couple times. Hey, can I stage? And eventually he tells me to go in. So I turn the top bulb on. I wait. Shirley, I don't know what she's doing over there. And finally she turns the top bulb on. I stage, and she holds me out. And I'm like, wow. So anyway, we go down the racetrack. I win. I'm going crazy. Everybody's going crazy. And you know, we're celebrating. First ever Top Fuel win is against Shirley Muldowney. Fast forward after the photos, and I don't drink at all, but my team does. Let's just say they got tuned up for the night.
We would be good teammates then, team members.
Yeah, I'm always the designated driver. But I finally, you know, it comes to me like, hey, Mike, was my radio not working? And he says, no, it was working. Why? I said, well, you wouldn't give me no info. I'm like, I kept asking you, should I stage? And he said, let me just tell you something. I work for Shirley, and I know Shirley, And if you were going to stage your car and not wait on her, I wanted nothing to do with it because you were going to pay for it later.
Oh yeah.
So, and I got to add one little thing to that story. So I talked about the team getting tuned up and wound up. Grand Bend has a bar on site, and a friend of this entire panel right here, Jamin Hogue, may have overindulged drinking vodka and cranberry juice and looked like the Exorcist later in the night onto Doug Herbert's trailer, which was the beginning of the whole Doug Herbert
Clay Millican rivalry.
I was going to say, so that's how it started.
That's how it started.
Drunk
I'm going to text Jamin after this and be like, man, you puked all over. You got this whole deal fired up between Dougzilla and Clay. Oh my goodness, man. That's hilarious.
Yes.
Did Shirley give you a piece of her mind or nothing ever said?
You know what? Shirley was amazing. She came over, like right out of the car. She came over, congratulations. She has given me a lot of really good advice over those IHRA years that I have completely stuck to. And have I been on her bad side? 100% I have. I think anybody that's been around her has caught the wrath of Shirley at some point or another. But yeah, exactly. JT's the only one not raising his hand.
I haven't yet. No.
But I got a lot of good advice from her. I got to.
You mind sharing any of it?
No, I mean the one thing that pops right in my mind is, back in those days, everybody seemed to use a minivan that had the sliding door. And she told me, she's like, when you're sitting there in the staging lanes, she said, leave that door open. I'm like, okay, why? She said, because it gives the presence of you are ready and you don't care and you don't have to hide yourself sitting in that van. I'm like, huh, okay, I like that. But I got to tell the truth. If it's hot out, I'm gonna have the door shut there. Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing she told me that has stuck with me is when it's your day, it's easy. And she's right. There are days, it doesn't matter what you do, smoke the tires 4 times in a row, but those wind lights still come on. Now, is it hard in the moment? Probably. But when you look back on it, you go, you know what? It was easy. And those are a couple things that she told me that has kind of stayed with me. And she's correct. When it's your day, it's easy.
It's funny you mentioned that, like, when it's your day, because I think, like, especially in this day we live in now where there's like all these gurus and everyone wants to tell you what you should do and life hacks, right? Like my 8-year-old daughter will tell me about life hacks. You know what I mean? Like, hey, here's a life hack I saw on YouTube. It's funny because I read something in a book one time that said how being like really married to a routine or needing things to go a certain way in order to be happy or feel like you're going to be able to be successful or whatever, that's like a real weak spot. Like if you go into every day saying, hey, if I don't brush my teeth with the Beach Boys playing and then have a glass of chilled orange juice and a silent 30-minute meditation, like that's the only way I can be happy or I can perform at my best, like you're going to be in deep water really quick because you can't control everything. So I think
want to drink that OJ after brushing your teeth, man.
No, you don't.
That might be the worst taste in the world.
It is the worst taste. But do you like reflecting on that when it's your day, it's your day? I mean, as someone who's been doing this, like we just discussed, for 25 years for a living, I mean, there's probably no one who's more robotic about just the processes of going drag racing. I mean, you drive your motor home, like that's part of the deal. Like you have all these kind of rituals and stuff, but do you agree that like being too set in that can be problematic?
So early in my career, I call it superstitious, call it whatever. And being a bracket racer, y'all got to remember, I grew up bracket racing, which is all about consistency. I don't do any of that. I have figured out the more you just let it go and let it come to you, the better off you are. And I'm going to give a little trade secret here. I watch all the Top Fuel guys all the time. Like when I get home, I fast forward and I just watch what they do on the starting line. And if I find someone that has a routine, I'm going after it. That's just part of it. I mean, obviously the Josh Hart thing has been a hot topic lately, and Sean Langdon, he knew that and he went after it. Did it cost him? Yes. But over the years, I have found people with patterns, and I exploit that. Back to being a bracket racer, you see everything. You got guys that do all kinds of weird stuff. But early in the career, I was real superstitious. Like I went on a little bit of a streak winning, and we left the broom at home for sweeping the trailer, so we're like, screw that broom. We're never bringing another one. We won some races, and I'm over all that stuff. Like, as time goes, we put customers in the tow vehicle with me, and for a little while I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that, but man, I am 100% wide open to anything going on. When I put my helmet on, then it's time to go to work.
That's
all that leading up to it, all of that leading up to it it doesn't matter,
That is interesting because in a lot of sports, they preach on routine, that, routine to get yourself in the mindset or to kind of a trigger, and it's funny that you've pulled away from that actually.
It's like you got to have routine, but have flexibility built in.
You're right. Yeah.
Because you told us, I was probably last time we had you on the show. I think it was when we were live down at Texas Motorplex, and you kind of took us through your whole driving routine and how you feather the pedal and don't have a throttle stop on the burnout, all those things, and kind of preached about how your routine is inside the car, but maybe outside the car is where you've had to build in that flexibility.
Yep, that's 100% exactly right. Once the helmet goes on, that's what I meant by that. When the helmet goes on, you try to do the exact same things, burnout length, clutch out time, all the things that the crew chief wants to see. Do I have a routine when it's time to turn the top bulb on? I do not. Do I have a preference first, last, those sort of things? I don't. And talking about drivers' routines, I got a good one for you because unfortunately, he don't race that much very more, but Larry Dixon, he and I have laughed about this, since then, but we've had some great races over the years. And Larry 100% did not care if he staged first or last, but he did care on who turned the first bulb on, which is odd. I picked up on that. And he and I and the fans didn't even know what was going on, but we would have a freaking burn down on turning the first bulb on, the pre-stage bulb.
I think that happens. I think there's a control element that like you're dictating the dance. And I see that. Like when you're sitting there pre-staged, you're kind of vulnerable. That's the way we always thought about it with my dad racing too. Ricky Smith is a great example of this. If you go in and pre-stage before Ricky does, you're vulnerable to him rolling in and turning on both bulbs at the same time. So there is a lot of times, like you said, you don't hear about it very much. People don't talk about it, but that is one of the games that's played for sure.
Oh, it is, and everybody wants to think, oh, I've got control, and again, this didn't happen overnight. I've been doing this for 25 years. I now have I don't know how to, I almost said a bad word. I have the I don't care attitude. The don't give a crap thing, just bring it. I don't care. But we have seen over time, and there's a great YouTube video about it out there. If I decide I'm going in last, I'm going in last.
Oh yeah. Even if the other dude is like 6'6", right?
Yeah, it was a bad idea after the fact. It was definitely a bad idea after the fact.
We should probably touch on that story. I know it's been well documented, but there's a lot of stuff to cover with you. Real quick, though, before I do, I want to remind everybody that each and every episode of the Wes Buck Show is brought to you by way of our friends at Stroud Safety. Stroud Safety is known for their top quality racing safety equipment, from drag chutes and seatbelts to fire suits, gloves, and blankets, all 100% made in America. Log on to StroudSafety.com and make sure we tell them you tell them we sent you. Guys, one thing I want to touch on before I don't know if we should go down the Dougzilla thing. It's well documented at this point, but we certainly have to touch on it. Because that was such I feel like a big fire starting moment for the sport, just about rivalries and stuff. Yep. Do you feel like just right now looking around the pits and like looking around the staging lanes, especially in like Top Fuel, Clay, do you agree? Like, is this having seen as much as you have in 2.5 decades, is this like an all-time high competition-wise? Like, it feels like there's a little feistiness amongst the Top Fuel and even funny car contingent that personally I haven't seen in a while.
Oh, 100% right now. The last few years, I think Top Fuel is definitely the most competitive it's ever been. It pretty much doesn't matter anymore where you qualify. Chances are you're going to get a guy that can strap one on you and kick your butt, or a girl. It's unbelievably tough, and rivalry wise, we're kind of seeing, I just mentioned it, the Sean Langdon, Josh Hart thing a little bit. It may be a little bit less of that going on, but on the racetrack, I don't think you will ever find when Top Fuel was any better. I mean, we just talked about, all the things that we did in IHRA, how dominant we were. And while saying that, yes, Steve Torrance definitely went on a run and was dominant, but at the same time, there were a lot of different winners. Last year, Brittany won the deal, but again, a lot of different winners. I think any car on any given day can definitely go out there and turn some win lights on. Look at Terry Haddock a few races back. He's out there knocking big names off left and right. I think the technology has just spread so much that everybody has kind of been able to find a combination to make their car really quick and really fast, which is great for the fans, But anymore, if you qualify, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, back years ago, if you qualified in those spots, first round wasn't necessarily a guarantee, but you certainly felt a little better about it than what you do right now when you do that.
Do you think that, I don't know how to say, there does seem like the competition wise, it's incredible where it's at, despite everything that's seemingly working against us, because I think it's probably safe to say that, well, it's the most competitive it's ever been. And there seems to be significant parity, or we have achieved some amount of parity. It also is like crazy expensive. We still see people blowing stuff up all the time. I would say or assume that it's as expensive to do this right now as it has ever been, right? One of the things that we hear a lot here at Drag Illustrated is that the NHRA was never better than when the IHRA was having those glory days that you're talking about, because it felt like it served as this unofficial feeder series. Like it was a place where a person could go get their feet wet and go compete at a high level, but not the 4 runs, not the multi-day, 5-day kind of ordeal that a national event, an NHRA national event turns into. What do you attribute that to? Like, I've said it before, and I don't mean it to be disparaging, but there are times when I feel like drag racing succeeds many times in spite of itself. Like, so little of this makes any sense, right? I mean, I don't even know how it's possible for our sport to be here 70 years in, as strong as it is today. All the factors that you just identified, Clay, car counts are solid, good cars across the board. Any given Sunday, it's anybody's race. How is that? Like, I'm having a hard time like figuring out how that's the case, considering everything that it feels like is working against us.
It's because, like you say every week, drag racing is the great American sport, plain and simple. But with you said something that going to take me back a little bit to the story that I was telling earlier about Peter Lehman making the decision to go IHRA racing. IHRA, I think, was definitely a good thing to have. And you said some things that are correct. It was a great way for people to learn how to race Top Fuel, a great way to learn how to compete for championships, which is certainly what we did. But it also was the hotbed for a lot of items that are now common. And I was talking about, we did it because of financial reasons, but at the same time, IHRA forced NHRA, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I don't care. IHRA forced NHRA to do things better. I talked about the 3 qualifying runs, 3 rounds of eliminations. It paid essentially the same amount of money to win an IHRA race as it did an NHRA race at the time. We had, 10, 12 races in a season, and it paid $200,000 to win the championship. NHRA had 22, 21, 23 races, paid $200,000 to win the championship. Winning a race was, I think, $22,000 in IHRA, and it was like 30 in NHRA, but you had to make 2 extra runs to get there. And we can go down an unbelievable list of things that come from the IHRA. For example, the first sanctioning body that had points penalties for oil on the racetrack was the IHRA. Belly pans on top fuel cars came from Mike Klober, to be honest with you, and our team. The first NHRA race I showed up at, after they implemented the points penalty rules, we had put belly pans on our top fuel car, and we were told we had to take them off because it was an unfair aero advantage. And then once NHRA, after, we had to run our car without them on there. And then after the fact, they came over and looked at our car and asked us to put them on. They looked at our car with them on there. And a lot of the other teams gave me a nickname for a little while. I was known as Clay Belly Pan because NHRA implemented that. And then let's just hop down the road that, is right up y'all's alley, especially. Where do we think Pro Mod come from? We know. Where did Top Dragster come from? We know. Where did Top Sportsman come from? We know. So do we miss the IHRA? Absolutely. I think it would be a huge benefit if they were still there and strong like they were, back in those early 2000 days when we were racing that Werner car, because, you need that. Competition is a good thing. It makes everybody better. No different than how close the nitro racing is right now. It's because the competition is better and it forces everyone to step up their game. So I think we miss a second sanctioning body for sure.
Yeah, wow. That's a lot of good points.
It is. I mean, does that all pointed to were those decisions over at IHRA, like the belly pan thing and stuff like that? Was that them collectively being cognizant of the show? Like 100. they rolled into every event kind of knowing that this is a Friday, Saturday night thrill show, right?
I can tell you that's 100% what they were thinking of. I mean, we all know IHRA had some huge oil downs. I just made a joke about having the longest Norwalk oil down ever. They did something. This was Bill Bader Sr., which a man I miss every day because I would call him from time to time for advice and just because he was such a good dude. People did not know this, but he actually had 1,000-foot mile-per-hour clocks set up at Norwalk one year with the thoughts of going 1,000-foot racing long and well before we ever did. He was already thinking about that, just to speed up the show and to lessen the opportunity for oil downs. And he did that because what his thinking is, I don't care if these cars go 315 or 20 back then, but will they go 300 miles an hour and 1,000 foot? Because he knows that was the number that the crowd wanted to see on the scoreboard is 300. And so he was doing things like that. I don't know what year that was, but 04, 05, 06 was my last few years of IHRA. So somewhere, in that time frame, that's how far forward thinking that he was, and heck, I even did an 8th mile top fuel race, which was amazing. Oh, yeah. Of course, it didn't hurt that I left there with $106,000, but, but I miss the, the whole IHRA thing, that sanctioning body at one point was very strong and obviously had the people in Glendora paying attention.
You talk about NHRA and Glendora, and after that run of dominance that you had in IHRA, what was the thought process internally in your team, after 1 championship, 2 championship, 3 championships? What's the next move? How long are we going to stay here and continue to dominate IHRA versus possibly taking this leap and going to NHRA? What was the timeline? What did you guys discuss internally for making that move?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I've had people ask that before, and my answer always was pretty simple. We were sponsored by Werner Enterprises, and they 100% paid us to race IHRA. And so that's what we did. So there was no discussion of the Werner Enterprises top fuel car going NHRA racing. A few reasons. And one I have never told publicly, but I think I probably will now. But the main reason was for Werner was they did a lot of work for Clear Channel. And so for them, it was like a somewhat of a business to business deal. I mean, they also supplied trucks and trailers for the IHRA to move equipment around. And so there was, a business deal there. The story that I have never told, and I can't believe I'm actually going to tell this, but
I'm getting excited. Yeah.
Yeah. So we wanted to go NHRA racing. I can't tell you if it was after the first championship or the third or fourth or fifth or sixth or whatever, but we felt like we're ready to do this. And we were in Omaha, which is, home office for Werner. And we sat down with Greg Werner, the president of Werner at the time. And he point blank told us, and this was not about us going NHRA racing full time. This was after the car was pretty well established and we were winning, and we wanted to do some NHRA races. And obviously, if you're going to do that and you've got a major sponsor, which we did in Werner Enterprises, you got to have their blessing to do that. And Greg Werner's answer to us was pretty amazing, because he said, you know what? I have no problem with y'all going and doing that. I would like to see how you stack up against those guys. He said, but we have a major problem. And that is, we do about $500 million a year of business with Budweiser. You go race NHRA all you want, but you cannot beat the Budweiser car. Period. Simple. End of story. And we were like, wow. Well, how do we do that? Can we go race? Can we, and he said, absolutely, you can. But if you're the Werner car, you cannot beat the Budweiser car. And so,
wow,
if you think about it, and this is digging into the history a little bit, we started doing NHRA races, but typically our car would have some other sponsor on the car. We were the 104 car for a lot of races. We did the Elvis car. We did some other things, and we did race the Werner car. And I gotta also admit that, NHRA had called Werner wanting us to come over, and Kenny Bernstein himself actually called Greg Werner and said, you guys need to come racing, and it will be okay. If we race each other, it'll be fine. But Greg Werner had a book, a magazine about Miss Budweiser getting beat and Augie Busch having a come apart about it. And he's like, we're not doing it. So that's a story that I've never told.
We're not running the risk of upsetting the apple cart here.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Smart businessman.
Pretty
I mean,
smart.
to be honest, I mean, hey, you got to know who butters your bread, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that I don't fault that thought process at all.
And the whole
100%.
IHRA thing, I mean, the theme of it is smart business decisions. So that was the smarter business decision for
Do
you
you
guys to
think-
stay over there.
Do you think
kind of
that
hate that though, right?
I got to tell one thing, Wes, and I don't want you to lose your train of thought. And I don't know what year it is. I think it's 2004. We went to the final round in Houston, and we smoked the tires in the final against the Budweiser car. I'm not saying that happened on purpose, but we did lose to the Budweiser car in the final round.
Oh, man.
And the next NHRA race we went to the final round and lost to the Army car in Bristol, and we smoked the tires. So there's a trend there a little bit, and then the next NHRA race we went to, 3 in a row, we went to the final round, and Mike Klober's like, dadgummit, I'm not smoking the tires. And we lost to Corey Mack in the final, and we just pure OD got outran. But
Well, that had to feel great, right?
you went
go
to
over
three
there
straight final rounds in
Yeah,
your first 3 races?
because that was the issue with the IHRA deal. It was, oh yeah, you might be dominating over there, but come prove yourself over here in the big leagues. I mean, that was the story you
did.
heard. And
Yeah.
so to go over there on a limited basis and perform that way, that had to be really validating for you guys.
So, but fast forward, like, forgive me for this, but it took a minute, right? I mean, when we put you on the cover of the magazine after you won in Bristol on Father's Day, it was your first NHRA Top Fuel win, right?
19 years, brother, 250 something races. And I don't know, I think it was 10, 11 runner-up finishes. But back to what Mike was just saying about us showing up and doing well at the NHRA, 3 consecutive final rounds. We were limiting ourselves doing that as well, because the IHRA limited supercharger at 25% overdrive. And we had to look at the NHRA races while we were going there to win and show that this IHRA car can compete with the big dogs of NHRA. We maintained the 25 over, and the IHRA cars, I don't remember exactly, but they had to weigh a little more. And while we had blessing of Greg Werner to do just that, but he's, you know, we also looked at it as a great testing for what we were doing in IHRA. So we stayed at 25 over for those events as well.
Wow.
Did you pick and choose events that you thought that combination would work a little better?
We really had to do it according to sponsor dollars. You know, again, Peter Lehman, I just told stories of what a great businessman he was, and we wouldn't just go run to run. So IHRA was by far priority for us because Werner was paying us to race the IHRA. And 2, did we have sponsor dollars to go run an NHRA race? So, you know, we had to look at the schedule and figure it out. And when we got the 104 sponsorship deal, you know, we had to do it where they had strong markets. And of course, obviously the Elvis car was my home race, and I always wanted to do my home race. So, you know, that was a cool thing we did.
I got to ask one more question about the IHRA days, because I feel like we're getting ready to transition into the NHRA era. The Dukes of Hazzard car in Milan, Michigan. I was there at this race. They parked Pro Mod down around right at the scoreboards pretty much. And I forget what we were doing. I was not up there watching, but we were doing something at the trailer. And I see that orange nose of that car come by in the air at the finish line, and basically see the whole car above the trailers, above the grandstands, blowing over. Is that still the wildest moment of your career? And can you like take us through that whole deal? What led up to that? Any kind of changes, or, you know, how did you react to that whole situation?
I love telling this story. You know, leading up to that, we had been running some NHRA races. We had been running really quick and really fast, and the balance of our car was edgy, I guess you would say. We had raced Route 66 Raceway, which we're going to this week, obviously. I've got a photo of the car somewhere of it passing the 8th mile cones with the front end above the cone. But the car was just ripping. I mean, we were just rolling. And so we get the one race sponsorship deal with Warner Brothers Studio for the Dukes of Hazzard movie, you know, with Johnny Knoxville. And I don't remember where we qualified or whatever, but we end up, which it was unusual. We raced Bruce Litton in the semifinals. That seemed to always been a final round matchup, but I was number 1 in points. He was second. We leave the starting line and the car shook the tires. In hindsight, I made a mistake, and I'm the one that caused the car to blow over, but it shook. And at the tail end of the shake, I pedaled the car. Looking at the computer after the fact, the shake was really done. I could have just drove through it, but I pedaled it. And again, we had the balance of the car pretty light on the front. And so it started carrying the front end. And I could see that I felt like I was still in front of him. And so I'm like, oh, this wheelie will be fine. It'll come back down. And it's just kind of maintaining it for a moment. And we're talking, you know, a couple foot off the ground, way higher than it needed to be for sure. And it made a move and started coming up just a little more. And it maintained that for a moment. And it made another move as the clutch was starting to really lock up. And once it was like I'm seeing the scoreboards, I'm like, we're done. You know, it hadn't like rotated at all. But I shut the throttle. I grabbed the brake. And I'm telling you, I grabbed the brake as hard as I possibly could. And it was so slow motion that the car just continued to come up and up and up. And then poof, the body blows off of it. And It was without a doubt the quietest moment of my entire life. And I don't mean like life flash in front of your eyes. It was just silent. The body's gone, and I know the car's fixing to go over backwards. And I get in the fetal position because I'm like, here it comes. This is going to hurt. But as I'm passed straight up and down, I hear the engine start running again. So I reach over, I cut the fuel off, I cut the switches off, and then it comes on around and it hits the ground. And I'm like, that didn't hurt. I'm okay. And through this, a couple of times, I actually keyed the radio up. I'm okay. That's all I said is I'm okay. The thing's upside down. It's sliding. It's making all kinds of noise. And I'm just sliding backwards. And I relaxed enough. I just said, I'm okay. On the radio, no answer, no anything. And it continues to slide for 3 days. And finally, I see the wall. And I'm like, uh-oh, if it touches this wall, it's going to start tumbling. So fetal position again, all wadded up, ready. And it just continues to slide. And it finally comes to a stop. Whew, take a breath. I'm like, wow, on the radio again. I'm okay. Well, Howie Dalton, one of the IHRA safety guys.
Oh, yeah, I remember Howie.
Yep. And Mike Baker comes sliding under the car. The roll cage is literally 3 or 4 feet off the ground. That when Howie was on his knees, he and I were eye to eye. Obviously, I'm hanging upside down. And he's like, are you okay? I'm like, yes, I'm fine. And he's reaching up for my seatbelts. I'm like, Howie, don't touch that. And he said, I thought you were okay. And I said, I am. But if you undo those seatbelts, I'm probably not going to be okay because I'm going to fall out of here. And so him and Mike Baker and a few others, they get me out of the car. And I'm like, I'm 100% fine. I promise you I'm fine. And they lay me on a backboard, strap me to the ground, all that stuff. And I'm like, guys, I am 100% okay. And so I'm laying there, and there's like all this chaos, all the safety people. And I asked Mike Baker, I said, will you let Mike Clover come over here and make sure I'm okay? Which this is going to make me back up and tell another story. And he agreed to it. So I'm going to stop that story right there. And I'm going to back up to when I drove Nitro Nick Bonifant's car with Mike Clover tuning it, which was the first time I ever worked with Mike Clover. We raced Reading, which is home race for the Bonifants. Everybody knows them. They make all the clutch discs for all the Nitro cars. So we run terrible at Reading, and we decided to test on Monday. So I make a test run. Back then, everything was fast. We make a run. I open the parachutes. Everything seems normal. And we're at Reading, which is very short. And when I open the chutes, I feel the chutes hit, reach over, grab the brake. I have 0 brakes, none. And we're at Reading. It's a very short shutdown area. And I hit the catch net. I plow off in there, probably going 100 miles an hour or better when I go off into the sand trap. I hit the catch net. I'm literally just shaking all over because I had no brakes. I hit the catch net. The thing comes to a rest. Here comes John Force down there. First time I ever met him. A, he was either being nice and checking on me, or B, he was just seeing how long it took for me to get out of the sand so he could make a test run. I'm not sure. But so here comes Mike and the Bonifants, and we get the car out of the sand trap. Well, somehow, some way, when the parachute opened, it had broken the brake line off the chassis. So it had no brakes. And as we're pushing the car back by hand because it had no brakes, Mike kind of put his arm around me and he's like, man, you are literally vibrating all over. And I'm like, man, that was scary. I literally was couldn't stop, just 100% shaking. So there's that story. Now, fast forward to me on that backboard at Milan, Michigan, and me asking Mike Baker to let Mike come over. So he motions for Mike to come over. And the first thing that Mike gets to is like my feet. And he gets down on his hands and knees and he puts his hand on my ankle and like my knee or my thigh or whatever. And he's like, man, are you okay? Are you okay? And of course, my head's strapped down. So I got my eyes cut at him. I said, Mike, you're the one vibrating this time. And he was literally trembling, having watched, what I just,
oh my God, man.
Yeah.
I mean, just
That's
watching that
story,
and like
man.
seeing the reaction of the people. Cause that's one of the things that there are for a sport, and there's a slew of things I want to touch on here, but for a sport that seems so like singularly focused, there's one driver, there's one car, right? The amount of people that are invested in the outcome of whatever happens out there, and that's why I have like such a strong reaction when I see like the NHRA like pick and choose who's allowed up around the car. I understand the safety component of it. I really do. But I also recognize the emotional attachment and the investment that so many people have.
Well, everyone
happens
felt
out there.
attached to Clay at that time. I feel like I remember our reaction. We ran to the wall. We didn't go over the wall, but everyone was concerned because Clay was like the mascot for IHRA, and to see a car that was so dominant and so successful and so under control, well prepared, well driven, everything, to all of a sudden have this crazy accident like that. It's like we all kind of felt it. I feel like everyone in the IHRA was highly concerned because Clay was like leading the charge for everybody at the IHRA, and to have our leader and our dominant face in that situation, it resonated through all the classes, through the entire pits.
Oh, it was a crazy, obviously, again, it was my fault looking back on it, but so to completely finish that story, since we done spent so long on it. So I'm in the ambulance and they pull to the gate and stop. Mike Klober's in there with me, and y'all know Mike, he can get pretty animated, and he's like, why the F are we stopping? Let's go. And I'm like, Mike, I'm fine. But they just stopped. And so he's like pecking on the window, like telling the driver, let's go. And I don't know if y'all remember, but Jim Weinert was the man on the starting line at IHRA.
Yep.
Well, Jim Weinert, they did not know if he had had a heart attack or what had happened, because just like you said, Mike, everybody was like so concerned, but him trying to get to the far end of the racetrack, he basically needed to go to the hospital like right now. They had 2 ambulances on site, and they cannot send both ambulances and leave an event with no ambulance. It was more important for Weinert to get to the hospital than me. They knew I was okay, or because I kept telling them I was okay. And so they stopped us at the gate and sent Weinert to the hospital, and we had to wait until another ambulance showed up.
Wow.
I could go. Yeah.
Were you the starter for the next few?
Should have been. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, man.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, it's tough out here, right? I mean, we've got limited resources. No, it's that whole situation is just unbelievable. Going back a few weeks, we had a similar instance to your testing fiasco with Matt Hagan, when it would appear, by all accounts, the brakes failed on that car. I don't know if there ever was like a real follow-up to what exactly happened, but he went in there without it would appear from the replays and stuff, like no scrubbing speed whatsoever.
Yep.
Into the gravel there and the catch net at Z-Max Dragway. Real scary moment, right? And I'm just curious because you could tell Matt's this huge burly guy that is like, he's a farmer, and I mean, he's the guy, rides motorcycles, he's that dude. But you could tell, like, even from afar, that really, really got his attention.
It is a horrible feeling. I actually had another situation at Reading when I was driving Dexter Tuttle's car. We're racing Doug Coletta first round. I sound like Garnets. We were racing Doug Coletta first round. I do my burnout, grab the brake handle, and literally it come off in my hand.
Oh, shit.
I have I've got the brake handle. It broke off from the chassis. And so it's just a horrible sinking feeling to have no brakes. I hope nobody ever knows what that's like, especially on the street. At least at the racetrack, you can center up and hit that catch net, but it is just the worst feeling ever. That or hung throttle. I don't know, which one's Actually, I think the brakes are worse, to be honest with you, because at least with the hung throttle, you can, cut the fuel off, let the thing blow up, and then grab the brakes. But man, I know what Matt felt like, and Matt had no parachutes. I, at the very least, had parachutes, but I had no brakes. So maybe he had some brakes and no chutes, whichever way it was. But it will make a big, tough man vibrate. That's for sure.
Holy moly, man. Well, on the upside, and going back, like this IHRA story, for whatever reason, man, and I'm not trying to like toot our horn, but I feel, Mike, JT, this would be a great time for you guys to back me up, but I'll spit it out here. But I really feel like I feel like we did some of that work with the World Series of Pro Mod. I feel that, and even going back to like 2017, when we put the first World Series of Pro Mod on at Bandimere Speedway out in Denver, I felt like we kind of changed the arrangement of the marquee. We made it a known thing that Pro Modified, as a sole eliminator, can carry a show. It can be the show. You don't need to have that in fuel altereds and that in a bunch of booked in top fuel cars. Like, it can be the top billing. And I do feel that it very quickly after that, it felt like there was a renewed appreciation or a renewed interest in Pro Mod from the NHRA. So I think that those things, I mean, Mike, JT, Mike, this would be a moment to echo those sentiments if you think I'm not just talking shit.
Oh, he actually wants us to say something right now.
Yeah, listen, you guys have been getting in way more often than I'm comfortable.
No, I
with,
agree, man. I definitely agree with you. And it had more of that IHRA feel. I miss the IHRA days, man. I mean, talking about all this stuff, it brings back, that was a great time in my life. And I was young, kind of learning the ropes, and a lot of stuff I learned or got my experience in drag racing at a high level was IHRA.
What was it?
I think it was the big church or big wedding, small church thing that we talk about. Now, we went to a lot of big high class tracks, but we went also to some smaller tracks, second rung, we'll call them, like, at
Saturday
that time,
night tracks, I like to call them.
Rockingham was a big one. NHRA no longer went to Rockingham because the way the stands come literally right up to the wall, right? Well, that brought that feeling, that Saturday night, quick eight, especially for Pro Mod guys, it was the closest thing to taking the quick eight Saturday night feel and moving it to a big stage. And you had a great TV package back then. You had great sponsors. You had Hooters, Feld Entertainment, where, as far as the owners or series presenting sponsors.
Summit Racing.
Summit, that deal was just rocking and rolling at the time. I remember going, we don't need an HRA, especially on a Pro Mod level. There was the talk, they had started the exhibition deal and were sort of dabbling in it and doing the NHRA Pro Mod, and all the IHRA Pro Mod guys were like, we're good. This is good for us. The pay, like you said, Clay, as far as making a career out of it or making it make sense, we went IHRA racing. Our goal and our budget model was to just qualify. If we qualified, because it paid, I believe it was $2,000 or $2,500. It might have even been $3,000 at one time, just to qualify for a 16-car field. And if you could go to all those races and qualify, and you had some sponsor money, you could get some part support from companies, you could make it make sense. And you couldn't really do that elsewhere. And so we kind of had that same model as well. And it was just a great deal. And especially under the Bader ownership, like you said, they really knew how to do it, put on a show. And that was where, in my opinion, IHRA really peaked. And then it just sort of struggled as it started changing hands and everyone sort of had a different direction for it. But I'm with you. You probably had the same feeling where everyone wants me to go NHRA racing, but we're good here, having a great time, running well. And this is some good competition. And, it just had all that going for it. And slowly it sort of fell apart.
Clay, Mike said something there that, because these two and our whole team at Drag Illustrated have asked me that question, like on the heels of our 2023 running of the World Series of Pro Mod. I had a lot of people, Mike included, like, what was it? Like, what is it that everybody is so in love with? What is it? And I'm just curious, something that Mike said there, everybody's having a great time. Yeah. Well, do you think that was that part of it, Clay?
I can tell you, I didn't make it to Bandimere, but I went to your first one in Bradenton. Orlando, excuse me. Yep. And it definitely had that IHRA a little, I don't know why, but just like a little more friendly, I mean, I'm running around there getting YouTube content that was gold because it was like it was a little more open. It didn't not, and y'all don't take this the wrong way, but maybe not quite as structured, but at the same time, it gives it that Saturday night feel of going to a heads up quick 8 somewhere, you know, that sort of thing. I mean, it was just fun. Like me and Donna go to races all the time, and me and her were, you know, cruising around on the golf cart, and people were out having fun. And
do you think that was some of the attraction to IHRA for you though? Like if you compare and contrast, and I'm not at all trying to get us to like get us in trouble, but I've said this earlier this year, there is a thing, and there's a lot of layers to this onion. We all get a little jaded over time, and it's easy to become desensitized to how good life is and how blessed we are to do what we do. And I don't want to overlook any of that. However, I felt this whenever I went from the World Series of Pro Mod in Bradenton. I left there, went home for a couple of days, and I flew straight down to Gainesville for the NHRA Gator Nationals because A, that's my favorite race. B, you could feel the buzz, and I, you know, hell, I wanted to go down there and like, you know, get some kudos or whatever, right? Somebody's going to tell me a good job.
Strut around a little bit.
Yeah.
Strut around a little bit.
The truth comes out now.
The truth comes out. So anyways, but there was another reason. Part of me wanted to go just show that no matter what we were doing, we were going to support. Like it was the last thing I needed to do. It caused some strife in the house. Like, you know, it was the last thing I needed to do, but it felt like the most important thing I could do was to go show that we're not here to try to compete or one up NHRA. We want to support the sport of drag racing, and I'm going to be here.
And I think it helped them, you know, like in any series, you told all the stories of these racers for months, you know, and quote cards and, you know, articles on the internet, articles or having people on the show. You know, we've told all these stories, you know, everybody got to follow along, and then they got to watch the race. And that was leading into the season. So now everybody's invested, I think, more into these drivers and these teams than they ever had been before, actually.
So to that point, I guess what I was going to say, T, is that I felt all those things, but being there personally, now don't get me wrong, place is packed, people like crawling all over, unbelievable, real like inspiring moment for me. Like I remember standing on the tower. You know, they have that little stairs up the side of the tower there, and I'm looking out at this sea of cars and traffic both direction.
Drag race of all time by Brett Kepner's, not estimation, but probably a fact coming from him.
Yeah,
most attended drag race, and probably the most as far as gate numbers, the most what's the word I'm looking for?
Highest gate,
lucrative.
Yeah. So all those things considered, walking through the pits, I couldn't help but feel that I was just at the next job site.
And that's that's the thing. Just to bookend it, the IHRA versus NHRA deal, everyone was there. I mean, Clay was there making money and it was his job, but everyone there was a hobby weekend racer, even in IHRA Pro Mod. And it was optional. And if you were going to go and do all this, you better be having fun. And that's what World Series of Pro Mod is about. And that's maybe the difference with NHRA. I just wonder if that is part of what, and I'm not identifying issues. I'm just saying. No, it's the way it is. When you get to the big leagues with NHRA, all the intensity and everyone's livelihood is on the line and reputation. It's just different at IHRA and / World Series of Pro Mod.
I had a blast at the World Series of Pro Mod. I really, really did. And you know, and it does sound like I'm being one of the old guys. Well, I remember back in the day, we had 32, you know, top fuel cars, 32 funny cars and all that. You know, this is how I make a living. And, you know, we need those corporate things. But at the same time, I think there's room for the World Series of Pro Mod, for those races that have that Saturday night feel, to where it's not necessarily completely about dollars and cents. You know, I mean, right. Let's face it, a lot of the guys that y'all invited, they knew they weren't going to necessarily win, but sometimes there's events that you want to go just to be a part of it. And that's why me and Donna
guilty by association, right?
To Orlando. You know, that's why we wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to be a part of the one at Bradenton, but we were testing, you know.
Well, I've got a couple of things for you. Real quick, let me pay a few bills here and remind everybody watching along that each and every episode of the Wes Buck Show is made possible by way of our friends at Redline Synthetic Oils. Redline has a reputation with racers and hardcore enthusiasts for creating products that perform and protect better than any on the market, and they've been doing it since 1979. Whether it's your race car, your tow rig, your motorcycle, or your lawnmower, when you think about lubricants, you need to think about Redline. For more information, log on to redlineoil.com. Some great guys that take care of a whole lot of drag racing's most influential characters. I got to ask two questions, and this is going to be, like, I think this will be fun personally. This has been fantastic, by the way. Like, Clay, you were such a treat. Thank you for doing this and we need to do it more often because I think we can cover a lot of ground. But one of the things the IHRA just gives us a whole slew of things to talk about, but you were leading right up to it. Considering everything that we've just discussed, is there room in drag racing right now for, like, I don't know, a World Series of Top Fuel? You know, like, is there room for that now, do you think?
Sign me up. I'm there. Sign me up. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, I mentioned earlier, you know, the great George Howard put on the Rocket City Nationals, it was called. And, you know, I do match races when I can, when they make sense. You know, of course, we all know it's done got crazy for a small track to try to book in Top Fuel cars because it just costs so freaking much. But, man, you put on a race, Wes, it will because you – JT and Mike, y'all have established that you can do it. You know, it's no question. And a lot of people won't know that you and I have talked about this for many years now, off and on. You've established the fact that you can put on an event. You're going to pay the money. You're going to put a great show out there for the fans, and people will show up, you know. So is it the right time to do it? I think so. I mean, we had conversations during COVID. You know, I had the idea, let's do a live feed, crazy, off the wall, you know, race, which we didn't make it happen. But I think the time's right for Drag Illustrated and everybody on this screen right here to throw down the World Series of Top Fuel.
It's interesting because honestly, it's something that for a long time, it actually escaped me. Like, it just felt like I was kind of operating out of my pay grade. Does that make sense? Like,
yep.
You know what? That's probably beyond me. And Clay, you and I have talked about, and this is, I literally used this on another podcast Mike and I were on last week. It's like, there's cliques in this whole community, right? In drag racing. There's, you know, the billionaire boys club, I think, if you will, like the well-to-do elite wealthy group that can kind of do and operate, you know, however they want. And some of the dollars and cents of all of this, it matters to them. That's how they got their money, but they're not as, they're a little more immune to those realities of racing than some other folks. But there's also, like, just the nitro contingent. There's the door slammer contingent. I found in recent years that, like, there's a C between pro mod racers and pro stock racers. It's just a different community. Then you've got the community of, like, you know, NHRA pro mod racers, which is actually a relatively small group right now. I would say like less than 30, 35 or less guys that are willing to go race quarter mile to tour around the country. And then you've got this real strength in the regional series, the PDRA, the Northeast Outlaw Pro Mod Association, NMCA, the list goes on. Midwest Drag Racing Series, of course, this past weekend in Tulsa. Lots of places for those guys to go race. But that's one of the things that when I look at this whole kind of scene right now, for a long time, I felt like, man, it would be a pipe dream to put on a Top Fuel race or to put on a funny car race. And it's hard for me because my heart's in pro mod. Like, that is what I just described, that there is a massive inventory of pro mod cars. And that's kind of the beauty of it, is that there's a lot of room to build and there's a lot of room to scale. However, if you're only doing one race, or if that's not as important. So I've kind of altered my mindset a little bit when I start to think about the nitro and Top Fuel thing and funny cars, because initially I was like, oh man, there's just not enough of those cars, right? There's just not enough inventory for us really to build something that's sustainable. However, I go back to something, this is a funny story, but I remember back, Mike, you were there. I think it was like the 07 08 maybe, ADRL winter drags in Valdosta, Georgia. You guys would have been there running Pro Nitrous with your pops. But the ADRL, the upstart ADRL at the time, were trying to introduce their own brand of 10.5W racing, 10.5 tire, small tire racing, add it to their show. And I remember 2 cars showed up. I think it was Jack Barfield, gorgeous yellow and black 69 Camaro, and Steve Kirk, 2 cars. And I remember going up to the founder of that series, Kenny Nolling, and I was actually walking up to him, and I don't know who I thought I was, that I was going to offer any sort of like, I was going to be Mike Klober with my hand on his inner thigh or whatever and kind of tell him everything's going to be all right like he did for you, Clay. But I walked up to him and I put my hand on his shoulder. I'm like, oh, man, Kenny, I'm sorry, like only 2 cars showed up. And he looked at me square in the face and he goes, that's all we need to have a drag race. And I thought, truer words have never been spoken. You don't need 100 cars. You need 2. And I think about, these boxing matches and these UFC fights and all these things. It only takes 2 to tango, so maybe it's not as important. Like maybe I should free my mind up a little bit and go, just because there's not 200 top fuel cars in the country, just because there's not 200 funny cars in North America, doesn't mean that an event like that couldn't work. Right. Because you're going to go after the best dudes anyways.
Right. Those 2 guys you named were the best. They were the most visible, the 2 best 10.5 cars out there at the time. I can remember seeing so many photos of those 2 cars lined up beside each other. So those would have been your heavyweights. And if you can pick any 2 to have, those are the 2. And how many exhibition match races have we seen with just 2 cars in Pro Mod, Top Fuel, even like what Clay did? It's just that is so true. You just need 2 of the best to put on a show and show what it's about, and you can go from there.
Clay, you've been doing a lot of stuff with the Street Outlaws, crew and Jeff Lutz. And so how does that compare? Is that more like your the NHRA or IHRA?
Oh,
is it more laid back? And I know you're enjoying the heck out of it, seems like, but
so I got to tell you, it's completely different than both, and
something completely new.
It's 100% different crowd. So year before last, I had something scheduled that I ended up not having to do. And I made the decision at 10 o'clock or so on Thursday night, I'm flying to Denver to go to the Street Outlaw race at Bandimere.
Yep.
We were just there, a couple weeks prior to that. And this is a good thing, but like I couldn't walk to the staging lanes without getting stopped every 100 feet or whatever. I show up to the Street Outlaws race, I might have got noticed 10 times in 3 days. It's
Wow.
such a different crowd.
Yeah.
It's such a different feel. But it would lean a little more towards the IHRA than NHRA for sure. But we're talking worlds apart. They don't, the people watching that don't have a clue about Top Fuel or IHRA, NHRA. They don't know. Yes.
When you showed up at that deal, are you in the Parts Plus shirt, black slacks like your go-to?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, yeah,
100%.
And you're still walking through there relatively anonymous.
Yeah.
Then you might convert some of those fans, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You actually have since that race, right?
Because that's the game plan.
You got Dentley out, right? And
it's such a different crowd. How that is. Another quick story. I went to London a few years back to speak at the British Drag Racing Hall of Fame. And, it was a paid trip to go and, supposed to be me and Donna. And well, at this time frame, Iggy, our dog, was ready to be picked up. He was now old enough to be picked up from his mama, so to speak. And Donna's like, I am not going. I'm going to pick up our new dog. And so I took Jeff Lutz with me. He was my work wife, basically. So we go to this British Drag Racing Hall of Fame, had a great time, and we had a free day. And so what do we want to do on our free day? We want to go see Santa Pod. We may never be there again, and we want to see this racetrack. So we go to see Santa Pod, and somehow, some way, we find out there is a car show happening at the EBC Brake Company, which is their corporate headquarters, worldwide corporate headquarters. And it turns out it was a roadkill event. David Freiberger was there, Steve Dulcich, and it was just a car show. And we asked to go by there. We wanted to go by there. Well, while we're at the British Drag Racing Hall of Fame, a lot of those guys were asking, who's that with you? I'm like, that's Jeff Lutz. So they're like, we don't know who that is, you know? And I'm like, Street Outlaws, you know, he's a star of that show. Well, they didn't know who he was. Well, we go to this roadkill event. We pull up, get out of the car. Nobody knew who I was. They all knew Jeff Lutz. You know, it's just funny, you know.
That is funny, the different worlds, you know. Yeah. And that goes back to your clicks that you're talking about, you know.
I don't understand that at all. I mean, you know, for us, we're gearheads. We watch it all. You know, we cover all the bases. If it's drag racing, we're paying attention. You know,
is it hard not to have, I mean, I say this a lot and I stand by it, but like, is it hard not to have like, I don't know, a twinge of almost jealousy of like the stardom that some of those no prep king street outlaw guys have achieved and the effort? Because here's the thing, those things don't happen like in a vacuum. There's a focused effort to turn a Jeff Lutz or to turn a Murder Nova or to turn a Justin Swanstrom into a star. There is an effort made to do that. They start including them on, you know, commercials. You start putting them in various places. Like you push that narrative. Is it, I mean, just kind of reflecting on 25 years, like in the drag. And I think this is sometimes why I get so up in arms. Cause I mean, I'll speak for you and you can say, but it pisses me all the way off. Right. I mean, all the way off. Because I personally like sharing this conversation with you and the infinite number of conversations we've had. Like, you're a rock star, and I feel like you should, every opportunity afforded to the cast of No Prep Kings, I feel there is a group of people in our sport at the highest levels that I feel strongly deserve that same opportunity. So I didn't mean to like answer for you, but do you feel any of that?
I'm not jealous in the least. And part of that is a few reasons. One, I know how much they work, how hard they work. I know what they do. I mean, I know the inner workings. I mean, I was just at Jeff's shop a week ago. You know, I know what's going in. They deserve every bit of that, you know, and you know, hats off to Pilgrim and Discovery for making those things happen. And I'm in a little bit of a weird situation from most, you know, pro NHRA racers in the fact that, you know, I've done multiple television shows. If you go back to the original, you know, not a No Prep King guy, but you call it the original drag race TV show, which was Pink's. You know, I was part of Pink's All Out. And Rich Christensen, you know, the arm drop guy, the ball-headed arm drop guy, Iowa boy, you know, he told me point blank, he said, I'm going to make you way more famous than you've ever been wearing that helmet. And nobody knows who you are. They know your car, you know, they don't know you. And he was right. You know, the more that people get to know drivers without the helmet on, without being associated with a car sitting there, you know, those guys have earned that right. And there's so many of them that have gave their all and they're not part of the show anymore because they just couldn't figure out how the rest of it works. You know, you think about early on, a lot of the guys that are not part of that anymore. And that's because they're not all getting rich. You know, are the top guys doing well? Absolutely. But it's no different than NHRA drag racing at the end of the day. You know, the top group of them are getting paid to show up. They're getting paid, you know, for every episode. And then there's a big pile of them that are not.
They're basically selling themselves. And that's one of the big things in sales or taking a sales job at a dealership or real estate or whatever. You have to starve for those first few years while you're building your name, building your clientele. And, you know, and it weeds out a lot of people because a lot of people
don't have the staying power.
They just don't. And then they won't stick with it. And, you know, if they stay with it long enough, then you reap the fruits of your.
It's tough. I think that like one of the things that when you think about it, like that comparison, I literally just had this conversation with like the chick who cuts my hair because she's going out on her own. Right. And like, that's and this was really interesting to me. She's going out on her own. She's going to go to work at this other haircut place. And I asked, okay, so like, are you in business for yourself or how does this all work? And she goes, well, actually early on, they're going to pay me like hourly and a commission on my sales. to prepare me for eventually being like a straight, doing it, running it all through myself. I thought that's so interesting, because it's kind of like the car dealership that hires a new salesman and says, hey, I'm going to give you this little bitty draw, right? And this is going to be what you get by on, but it's to incentivize you to sell stuff so they can eventually put you on a straight commission gig. The difference between all of that is she's got like some clippers that she's got to plug in, and like a fan, but like the aspiring street outlaw has like a $500,000 rig, a $250,000 race car. So it's hard. I mean, you got to have some serious wheel
contract to that they're going to show up, even if they wreck or blow up, that they got to have it fixed. And, they're operating on a small budget and not getting paid shit, because they're not one of the stars yet. But that car's got to be ready.
It's a big ask is my point. It's a big ask, and it takes like a really special. I mean, I think about like someone like Justin Swanstrom, just as an example, not saying that, but he's damn near like made for this, right? I mean, he's unattached. He's 27. He's got the support of his family. They have their own family business that has allowed them, to kind of get some of this role. I'm not saying it still supports him, but I mean, he's been tailor-made for this. He's got the personality. He's got all the things. He's got the tech savvy. He's got all those things that I think have put him in the position that he's in now. But he is a rare bird.
The willingness to be the bad guy.
The willingness to be the bad guy. The willingness. So a couple of quick things. Real quick, I want to touch Clay. Tell me, what did Rich Christian? I want to know more about that conversation with Rich Christensen, because I look back at him and Pinks and all what that represented.
Dude, I used to love that. I have the theme song. I bought the theme song to Pinks on like iTunes store.
Really?
Back in the day. It like played that in my computer.
Well, so like, what were those conversations like? Like, what was he trying to accomplish with you? And, I'd love to hear kind of some of the ins and outs of that. Going to make you a bigger star than you were wearing that helmet.
Oh, so it's funny. I don't know if I'll answer your question or not, but I got to tell this, how that all came about. So I'm at the PRI show at someone's booth signing autographs, and they had announced that, now this is during the TV show Pinks, where, you lose the race, lose your ride sort of thing. They had announced they were going to do a Top Fuel Pinks. And I think, if memory serves, it was Bobby Lagana versus Doug Foley, I think, is who it was supposed to be. And so Rich Christensen is walking by while I'm signing autographs. I said, hey, Rich, I think that's pretty cool. You're going to do the Top Fuel thing, but how are you going to start them? And he continues walking by until I said, how are you going to start them? And he stops dead in his tracks, turns around and looks at me, and he's like, I'm going to arm drop them. That's what I do. And I'm like, bad idea with a Top Fuel car. Well, he had no clue who I was at all. I mean, I'm telling you, he had no idea who I was. But he was with, I think, Ken Herring, which did know who I was. And so he walks back to me and he's like, I'm the arm drop guy. I'm going to arm drop. I'm like, you can't do that. It will blow your ears out. It's just a horrible idea. You could get hurt. We have a little conversation. He hands me a business card. I don't have any business cards. I write my number on a business card, hand back to him. He's like, I want to talk to you about this. Well, he ends up calling me and he says, hey, I think you might be pretty good on television. Have you ever done television? I said, only when I take my helmet off at the end of the racetrack. And he says, well, you go to work with me and I'll make you more famous than you've ever been from driving that race car. And that was kind of that conversation. Really interesting guy. He is, I don't know the term for him. He obviously knows zero about race cars, but he found lightning in the bottle, kind of like what Pilgrim's done with the whole Street Outlaws thing. Because from that point forward, Pinks obviously was the largest show on cable at the time, Speed Channel. It was their number one show. And they started having problems with people actually giving up their cars. Like they didn't want to do it. Turned into some lawsuits and that sort of thing because the person wouldn't give their car up. And then that's when Pinks All Out came about. And he called me back and said, I've got a show that I want you to be a part of because you actually know drag racing. you could kind of be our referee, you know, so to speak. And so I thought, well, this is just a great opportunity for me, for people to get to know me without my helmet on. And so I did it. But back to the Pilgrim and Rich Christensen, because he was so big at the time, you know, there was multiple spinoffs from that. And I got to do a show called Drag Race High that was an amazing show. You know, we did with high school kids building cars to race each other. You know, Pastime came out of that. There was just so many shows that come from that. Interesting guy. You know, he had great ideas, but sometimes his execution was a little weird. Me and him more than once got sideways. Sometimes, well, one episode in particular on camera, and we had some absolute knockdown dragouts off camera because he didn't understand drag racing, and I knew what was right and wrong, and he didn't care. He's like, I don't care what's right and wrong. All I care about is entertaining the people watching on television, and in some ways, he's right.
Well, I mean, and you think about that, Mike. I mean, I saw Mike like smile a little bit because like that is the lens through which all of this No Prep King stuff is seen. And I do think that, like, I mean, even several years ago when you're having that conversation with Rich Christensen, I mean, the story remains the same today. The race is part of it, but it's a show first. It's entertainment first. And whatever serves that motive is what's going to happen. And it's still, I think, a tough pill to swallow, I think, for like this whole drag racing community, is bridging that gap or understanding that this gray area that show kind of exists in, right?
Yep. And I want to go back to Top Fuel World Series kind of thing. Years ago, Bill Bader, since we've covered so much IHRA stuff, Bill Bader offered $100,000 for current NHRA champion Larry Dixon to race me at Norwalk under IHRA rules. And Don Perdome wanted nothing to do with it. I mean, I sat down with Don Perdome. I'm like, man, do you realize how huge this would be? You know, it's unbelievable.
Like a match race, like
a match
best
race.
2 out of 3 type of deal, or
best 2 out of 3. Winner takes $100,000, and we would have a real champion.
Was this during the Night of Fire or some other, or just it was going to be its own event?
I honestly don't remember that part of it, but $100,000 to the winner. Match race 2 out of 3.
Got my attention.
Yeah, real world champion kind of thing, and they didn't want nothing to do with it. I mean, I even sat down with Perdome, and I'm like, man, let's do this and split it behind the scenes. Which, Wes, I know you're like, oh, we're not doing that.
I understand.
Yeah. And he wouldn't happen, you know. And we talked about George Howard and, you know, the 101,000 Rocket City Nationals. When that first come out, it was an outlaw Top Fuel race, long before the word outlaw was anything. But, you know, all the NHRA teams, you know, not all, a bunch of them, oh, we're coming, you know, blah, 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 blah. At the end of it, though, they didn't show up. You know, we had the Fram car with the Hartman family. It showed up. And, you know, mainly IHRA cars that showed up. But back to Street Outlaws, all the things going on, how it has changed how the average people now watch drag racing. They may not be watching us because we've had that conversation, but I think it's made that Billionaires Boy Club think maybe there is something else besides NHRA. I mean, $100,000 wouldn't entice all those people to go race a little racetrack that they're not used to. You know, again, I was all about it. We were there. You know, we were there for.
But do you think that they were probably a little bit on the side of maybe that they had more to lose than to gain? You know, as far as hey, we're NHRA. What if we go down there and lose, and then it looks like, hey, we're not the cream of the crop, you know, per se.
Which is what Bader wanted. You know, that's what he was. He was trying to bait them into that. You know,
right?
Yeah, 100%. You know, and Rocket City Nationals was an off weekend. You know, and my team busted their butt to get there and do it. But back to, you know, this group of people on the screen here in front of me doing a Top Fuel race, I do think that, you know, the entire Discovery thing may have changed the Billionaires Boy Club to look around a little bit and like, maybe we could do something else and have an event that is not necessarily all NHRA all the time. You know, I think, you know, that the landscape has probably changed a little bit. And, you know, NHRA, while that's where I make my living and I love it and I truly enjoy it, but I think there's room for other events.
And don't you think that I'm a high tide lifts all boats, guys? Like, going back to what I just said about pro modified drag racing, I've heard it from Tyler Crossno at PDRA, John Mazzarana. I've heard it from NMCA. Like, pro mod is there was a little bolstering of the class on the heels of that event, because people know that they need to be out chasing points, or they need to be out competing at a high level, or like getting our attention somehow, you know, being on the radar somehow. And that's not going to happen on Projects. Like, that's going to happen at the races. I think we're going to see throughout the course of 23, I think we're going to see car counts and attendance higher across the board at pro mod races, because those people are all people that want to be in the conversation when it comes time to start, you know, sending out invites for the 2024 World Series of Pro Mod. So I can't help but believe, to some extent, we could maybe create a similar dynamic, right, with in NHRA, where because I think initially maybe like, battle lines have been drawn, line in the sand, you know, whose side are you on? But I really don't think it would be like that. I think there's room.
It can't
right
be.
now.
It can't be because there's not enough nitro cars. You know, there's it's not like Pro Mod where there's you know, however many in the country, you know, but I think there's an opportunity for there to be a special event that's not NHRA sanctioned. Maybe it is. The Rocket City Nationals ended up being NHRA sanctioned.
No joke. I didn't realize that. And maybe it is. I mean, and that's the thing, is it's something like that. When you start racing cars that are going 300 some odd miles an hour, a collaboration is required. I mean, there's just, you can't, you're reliant on like the expertise of a slew of different people. I want to cut in here real quick before we dive into our next topic. We had a little bit of time left, guys. The Wes Buck Show is brought to you by way of our friends at flowracing.com. If you're a drag racer or a drag racing fan, you got to get on board with Flow Racing. The world leader in sports live streaming, Flow Racing provides unlimited access to drag racing's biggest events like Donald Long's Lights Out, No Mercy Sweet 16, every stop on the PDRA and NMCA tours, Funny Car Chaos, World Cup Finals, Streetcar Super Nationals, the World Series of Pro Mod, and much, much more. Personally, Flow Racing is a fixture in my life. I'm able to follow along with multiple racing events from the comfort of my own home or while I'm out on the road. The platform provided by Flow Racing is changing drag racing for the better, and there's no limit to the good they can do here. So log on to flowracing.com today and join the movement. Let's dive into a handful of just like current events. We talked about this to start the show and never went back. The NHRA rolls into Route 66 Raceway outside of Chicago, Illinois for the first time in several years, since 2019. Are you excited to go back to like what was this massively celebrated venue in the drag racing space that in many ways has been shuttered for the last several years? Clay, are you excited to get back to Chi-Town, the Windy City?
Man, more than you can even imagine. I mean, we started the show and boy, did we get sidetracked, but
that's our specialty.
We do that.
We're good at that.
Yeah. You know, I was the very first Top Fuel car to ever pull out on that racetrack as the Chicago White Sox car, you know, in a rented car from Donnie Holbrook with Bruce Litton's team crewing it. You know, I go out there on that Friday night run and, you know, made my first ever 4-second run. And of course, we got to back up to my first qualifying run where I actually thought I knew more than I really did at the time. And I may have blipped the throttle in reverse and scared Richard Hartman into losing a few years of his life from fear, because I hit the throttle going backwards when he was hitting the throttle blade to slow it down a little bit. But, you know, that place is super special to me. You know, Peter Lehman basically put that deal together, and you know, we were talking about that may be the only race that I was ever going to do. And at one point I thought that was the only race I ever wanted to do after I got called to the tower after touching the throttle in reverse and having to go see Buster Couch and getting a pretty serious talking to from Buster. But fast forward to the 20th anniversary of Route 66 Raceway, which was 2018. I won that race. You know, it was pretty dang cool, you know, to start my career at a racetrack. And we just talked briefly about it. It took me 19 years to win my first one. And then the following year to go and win on the 20th anniversary for me and the racetrack. I'm super pumped and excited to go back to the stadium that is Route 66 Raceway. And I've got a lot of curiosity up. You know, what's the place look like? Does it look run down? Have they done a lot of work to make it where it looks the same? I mean, we're in my office right here, and it's this way, wherever it is. That picture, it's weird how that's backwards.
Yeah, it is.
That is Route 66 Raceway that on that poster right there. You know, I love that place. It's got a lot of sentimental meaning to me just for all the things that have happened there for me.
That's awesome.
It doesn't seem like it's only been since 2019.
I
mean,
know,
in my mind, this place has been closed for a decade.
I
just don't know. I don't know why that is. But yeah, a historic place. We were actually talking with Courtney Enders on last week's show. Erica got her first win there. So it's in Chicago in 2012. So it's definitely, and it always was the host of the I go to talk about it. It's going to slip. The Jegs All-Stars. Yep. The Jegs All-Stars deal.
Well, the Jegs All-Star deal actually moved from Indy to there because that way it wasn't part of the U.S. Nationals and it became its own huge event.
Yeah, that's what that event became known for. The Chicago race was the Jegs All-Stars event.
Yep.
Now it's really interesting to me because I can't imagine, like, I just think about everything like through the lens of owning a business, and it's like to build a place, to have a place like that. And especially like I'm a Midwest guy. I was born and raised in Northeast Missouri, and like going over to the Quad Cities and going to Byron Dragway or going to Cordova, like there's, I mean, Terre Haute, Indiana. We went over there a bunch. I mean, there's drag racing's got a foothold in that part of the country, like for sure. And I remember like just always being surprised the struggles that place had. I mean, obviously it's not the market. I don't think it's just the venue. It's big, it's cumbersome. And maybe a little bit of a reminder, a beacon, a reminding beacon to everybody who builds a drag strip or whatever, like be wary of what it costs to turn the lights on at this joint. Because if you build a Taj Mahal of drag strips like that joint is, it takes a lot to run it. My big interest, following along the same lines as you, Clay, is just what's the place look like? How has it, I mean, I think much like anything, a motorhome, a collector vehicle, the worst thing you can do is let something sit. It is the absolute worst thing that you can do is to let something sit. And I remember seeing that firsthand in St. Louis when they shut down Gateway International Raceway and put those concrete Jersey barriers in the water box. It was amazing to me how quickly Mother Nature reclaims what's hers. Right. I mean, it's just, you couldn't believe the place that grass was growing, and you couldn't believe what happened to the tower, and the animal infestation couldn't be stopped. I mean, all these things that you just don't really like. Don't they shut the doors? It doesn't matter. Right. Yeah. Don't they lock it? Doesn't matter. I mean, Mother Nature reclaims quickly, and I'm anxious to see what this whole deal looks like, because it is putting on a drag race is like a logistic nightmare. I mean, not only do you need like sunshine and blue skies, but like there's all these underground wires, this complicated timing system, all this stuff that is, I mean, we saw it actually this past weekend at Tulsa Raceway Park, which is an extremely active, well-kept racetrack. They had like some mice burrow into like the starter box or whatever and screw up some wiring, and it delayed the race because you know, they had a family of mice move in. So it's like, I can't imagine a joint like Chicago that's as big as a small city and hasn't been used since 2019. Like I can't imagine how long NHRA has had people there running around trying to, I mean, I'm assuming and hoping quite a while. Let's hope, because from what I'm told, the track, like, and this is like a funny Route 66 Raceway has 2 employees. Like there are 2 people in charge of that entire property. This will be one of the rare instances where NHRA is completely operating this event. So I'm kind of anxious to see it from that perspective, because their deal moves track to track. Like you go to, let's use Bandimere as an example, or maybe Norwalk, these tracks that are extremely well known for their operation. NHRA, I'm not saying a skeleton crew, but they can go in there with a lesser crew because they know the track's got this thing by the tail. That varies from venue to venue. Some places need more infrastructure. Some places need more help. I mean, and it goes beyond the operation of the race, parking cars, right? Managing traffic flow, all that stuff. From what I gather, NHRA's got the whole kit and caboodle to sort out for Chicago. Yep. So it will be interesting.
I want to completely swap gears, which seems to be fine to do on this show.
It's fine
100%.
Yeah, have at it. Yeah.
Just blip the throttle backwards.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You've done it before.
You don't have to use a clutch around here.
So you mentioned Bandimere, and I wanted to just say that John Bandimere's post, his video on what's happening there, is one of the most awesome things ever, because he has what it takes to sit in front of a camera and tell people, this is what's happening. This is what's happening with our facility. This is how we're going to shut the place down. This is what's going on. Unlike what happened at Atlanta, what happened or what is going to happen at Phoenix, is so many rumors, so many people. Well, I think this is happening. I think that's happening. John Bandimere sat down and told the world, this is what's happening with this facility. And I appreciate that so much, because right down the road from me is Memphis International Raceway. I get phone calls, text messages. People stop me at the store. I heard so-and-so's buying it. Have you heard this? What about that? It's so refreshing for somebody to just tell you straight up, this is what's happening. And that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But I just wanted to say thank you, John Bandimere, for 65 freaking years and sitting down and telling us what's happening.
Man, I couldn't agree more. I actually spoke with Tammy Bandimere when I was out in Charlotte for the NHRA 4-Wide Nationals there at ZMAX Dragway. And I echoed that sentiment, Clay. I said to her, I was like, man, the transparency. I mean, there was the rumor mill, had been churning for a minute, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'd been rumblings of this for a couple of years, and you couldn't help, if you were a student of the game at all, to notice that, like, oh, those houses are getting closer. Every time I go out here, those houses are getting closer. I don't know how that's not going to be a problem at some point in the future, and clearly it is, and would likely have continued to be. But I agree. Two things: the transparency. We think it's something that lacks in drag racing by and large. I mean, JT talks about this all the time, like in stick and ball sports, how frequently the bosses are in front of the camera. Like, that's a very common occurrence. I mean, even if Roger Goodell's got to walk out to a showering of boos and jeers, he makes the walk. And I think that's an impressive thing, right? I mean, he walks out there on drag. Anytime he's in front of a camera, they're all but lobbing beer bottles at him. And he still does it. And that being willing to go step out front, Adam Silver with the NBA, the list goes on. I do find sometimes there is, as a whole, a little bit of a lack of transparency that exists in drag racing. And I think it's because it's one of those identity crisis moments that our sport has. Is in one breath, we want to be the big time. We want to be treated the same way that these other sports are treated. And we want the same level of reverence, et cetera, et cetera. We want the same amount of sponsorships, and we want all those things, but we're not quite willing to wear that hat and do what's required. Because to have all those things, you're probably going to have a very visible leader. You're probably going to have a lot of press conferences. You're probably going to have to speak on uncomfortable situations.
Answer the hard questions.
Yes. And, the fact that John Bandimere, as a track owner, I mean, because that deal, Bandimere Speedway has been embroiled in controversy since COVID. I mean, they've got all this local pushback, and they defied some of the COVID restrictions. I mean, this is a wild scene out there. Nonetheless, this man sits down in front of a camera, to your point, Clay, and like airs it out. Like, here's what's happening. Here's what's happened. Here's what's going to happen. Left it a touch open-ended, but I said to Tammy Bandimere, 65 years.
Yeah.
I mean, you're hard pressed to find a marriage. I mean, anything that lasts, that has that kind of permanence. And they have done more than their fair share for the sport. They've done they've served the Lord throughout all of this. Not only have they put on incredible drag races, but they've literally used the place to introduce people to God. It's an incredible, the way that deal has, and I tell this to Mike all the time, intention matters, right? I truly believe intention matters. And I point to that with World Series, everything that I talk about, Drag Illustrated, everything, yourself, Clay, like intention matters. Like it's easy to cheer for you because it's real, right? It is a guy living his dream, chasing his dream, fought the uphill battle, continues to fight it, went through all sorts of trials and tribulations. Do I have a ride? Don't I have a ride? Do I have a car? Do I have a crew chief? You know, all these variances and all these hurdles that you've had to overcome. Dude, intention matters. Like, and it's easy to cheer for you and to want the best for you. And I think that Bandimere, intention matters, man. We all know what they were trying to do, and we all know what they were trying to do for our sport. And so it's easy to cheer them on. And I hope, despite I know some of the vitriol and negativity that has existed on social media, which unfortunately is a breeding ground for that kind of commentary, but like those folks deserve to ride off into the sunset if they so choose, with all of us doing the polar opposite of Goodell walking onto the draft stage, cheering them on and thanking them for their contribution.
Agreed 100%. I mean, they have fought the fight. And if they call it good, you got to thank them for what they've done.
100%, no man. 100%. So a couple of closing notes here. Just looking at Top Fuel right now, I just think it would be crazy not to talk about all this and not talk about the last, what has it been, 6-8 months of operating as part of Rick Ware Racing, having this direct tie to a NASCAR team and various other, I don't want to butcher it, various other motorsports endeavors.
Right here in my backyard, man. Right here in my backyard, Clay. When are we going to get lunch, man?
I know.
Next time you're here.
Is the shop in Mooresville, Mike?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
No joke. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's been amazing. Rick Ware he's a bundle of energy. I do not know. Well, I mean, I guess everybody on this screen here is a little bit, wide open and don't stop and just go till they fall out. But so yesterday, let's just pick yesterday, for example. Rick has got an IMSA team, and they were, oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank on the track. He's at an IMSA race. Robbie Benton is the president of the company. He's at Darlington for the NASCAR race. And then there's all this communication that's going back and forth for Rick to keep up with everything going on. I mean, the weekend of the U.S. Nationals last year, when we announced that Rick Ware had bought the team from Doug Stringer, there was an IndyCar race that had Parts Plus on the side of the car, which was awesome. There was a NASCAR race going on that had Parts Plus on the side of the car, and there was the drag race, which obviously is Parts Plus. He also has a global Supercross team, and and it's just, I don't know how he keeps up with all of it. And the thing is that people probably don't realize is this guy races for a living. He is not part of the Billionaire Boys Club. I mean, he's a guy that somehow, some way makes all these things happen. And sponsor-wise, it's incredible. I mean, I just talked about where Parts Plus was just on one particular weekend, and he's done it with Summit. He's done it with basically every sponsor that we've had. We've done it with Edelbrock. I don't know how he keeps up.
It's interesting, Clay, along those same lines. I don't know if you remember this, but you, me, a couple other pro mod guys met in your trailer in St. Louis. It's probably been 10 years ago now. And you were at the time working with Scott Gardner, who I can't remember if the IHRA, if he was still involved with the IHRA or not. Actually, I think not. But the goal that you were talking about is kind of like the old Castrol super team days of putting together like a couple of sponsors that had representation on a slew of different cars, not just a Top Fuel team, not just Clay Millican, but also these pro mod guys, pro stock guys, pro stock bike guys, and so on and so forth. Is that part of like kind of the Rick Ware model? Okay. And do you find it, it has to help. So, is part of the plan to have you go to an IMSA race or go to a global Supercross deal and vice versa?
I'm always full of stories. So about 24 hours before the 24 hours of Daytona, Rick calls. He's like, hey, man, I want you to come to the IMSA race at Daytona. I got to be honest, I'm a gearhead and all that, but I don't know anything about IMSA racing. I have heard of the 24 Hours of Daytona. You know, that is like one of the crown jewels of road racing. Obviously, Le Mans being the biggest, but in this country is 24 Hours of Daytona. And so I go, and one of the coolest things that happened, we're on our way to the starting grid, which is an amazing make your hair stand up kind of thing once that gets going with the singing of the national anthem and all those sort of things. But I'm following behind Rick and Robbie because I don't know where I'm going. I just know we're going to the pit road. And as I'm walking, and this is funny now that I think about it, I just told y'all nobody at No Prep Kings hardly knew who I was. But as we're walking, making our way through thousands of people, I get stopped, and this man sticks his hand out and says, "Hey, I want to introduce myself. I'm Jimmy Johnson." And I'm like, "Yes, you are." 7-time NASCAR champion. Knew who I was. I was like, holy moly, that was incredible. But I know that has nothing to do with what you were asking me, but I was like blown away that Jimmy Johnson knew who I was.
I would be too.
Yeah. You know, he obviously watches drag racing. He knew who I was, you know, or maybe he watches my YouTube. I don't know. But, but anyway, you know, me going to some other events is going to continue. I've not announced this, which I've told stuff on here today that I hadn't told. I will be at the Indianapolis 500, which I'm very much looking forward to. I'm a NASCAR guy. Like I do really, truly enjoy NASCAR. My oldest son's named Cale after Cale Yarborough. And if it would have been up to me, Dalton would have been named Kyle after Kyle Petty. But Donna was like, Cale, Kyle, too close when we're yelling at them. You know, they wouldn't know who was getting yelled at. But, you know, so I'll be at the Indy 500. I went to the Coca-Cola 600 with Rick. I have been exposed to things that I would not know anything about. And I feel it's a huge benefit, not just for the sponsors, but in how we operate. Looking just hospitality, for example, at that 24 Hours of Daytona is incredible, highly unbelievable how nice they do it. A far step above what we do in drag racing. And what we do in drag racing is by far what separates us from every other form of motorsports out there, the access that we have. The level that they do and the amount of companies that come in and set up their own hospitality is very impressive. Rick Ware also bought a flat track team. I don't know if y'all know about flat track motorcycle racing.
Absolutely.
Yep.
He bought a flat track team. So while we were in Gainesville, I drove to Daytona and went to the flat track race and was amazed at how many people were there, just fan wise. And also the higher end people that were there, mainly a couple, one being Jim France of the France family that owns NASCAR. Mike Helton. I met both of these guys. They were there. They're fans of flat track racing. And this is an event, obviously, at their facility. Again, a different style of doing hospitality. Mission Foods. We all know they're involved with drag racing now. So they had this massive tent set up, hospitality area, but it was open to the crowd. It wasn't like what we do, what all drag racers do, where it's customers. Right. This was a hospitality area set up. I mean, yes, you had to pay to go in, but you got a wristband, and once you paid, you're good for the whole day. You can go in, have some food, you know, hang out, listen to what's going on. I mean, so what Rick has done, where I'm headed with all that, is opened my eyes to some of the things that we're doing right and some of the things we could be doing better.
What's left to do? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, because we're drag racers. We get wrapped up, we get the tunnel vision, and this is what we do. We get the blinders on. And so Rick is exposing me to all of it. And obviously he's very exposed to all of it. But what's so funny, no different than Doug Stringer, Rick as a kid was just infatuated with nitro cars, drag racing. That was what he wanted to do. He wanted to drive one. Doug Stringer, same with funny cars. He was a funny car guy. And Jimmy Johnson, knowing who I was. So while sometimes we feel like we're small, but those people are paying attention, like Mike Helton knew who I was or whatever, all these people. Drag racing is got to keep fighting the good fight and doing what you guys do every week, having this show. We're, in my opinion, on the climb because we are definitely the most perfect fit of a sport for the times we live in right now because it's instant gratification. I always say this, it's like a fist fight. We have a winner and loser really quick. And that's perfect for the way the world is right now.
Ever shortening attention spans of the masses. I mean, I couldn't agree more, to be honest.
And like you said, the input from these guys that really know what they're doing, have the experience in these other forms of motorsports, like Tony Stewart, Rick Ware, having those people involved in drag racing to me helps tremendously. Absolutely. I think we've seen that over and over, and we have to be receptive to it. I think drag racers also have this sense of pride, or we're going to do it the way we've always done it, or we know the way that it should be done over here. Take your other stuff and go elsewhere. But those guys have been successful for a reason, especially when it comes to fan engagement, marketing, sponsorships, TV, all these things on how we can do all that stuff better.
When you said we know how to do it, that sort of thing, we've had some, I don't want y'all to think it's arguments because it's not, but we know how to go drag racing. And Rick had ideas of, well, this is how we do things. And we've actually changed a few things in the way we prepare to go racing. So Rick has an engine shop that he works with right down the street in Mooresville. And I'm going to say this right here in front of everybody. Mooresville is a awesome place to run a nitro team. Everybody's Brownsburg. There is nothing that you can't get done in Mooresville. So Rick works with this engine shop right down the street. We now have our cylinder heads prepared there. We can take a block there, drop it off, pick it up the same day or the next day. We're getting a lot more prepared at the shop and doing less maintenance at the racetrack because that's how they do it. And to be honest with you, it kind of frees the crew guys up to spend a little bit more time looking at the race car versus putting valves and springs on heads. Now, we're still doing it, don't get me wrong, but
that makes sense, man.
It makes sense. It really makes sense.
Well, you got to write a book. You got to write a book. Really, with all the stories and stuff, that'd be a good book.
So who's going to play me in the movie, JT?
Oh man, who could we get?
Matthew McConaughey.
Oh yeah,
I'm telling you, dude. Matthew McConaughey is the only guy that I can even think that would be able to pull it off.
Serious muscle.
No, it'd be Matthew McConaughey would play you, man. I think there's a movie to be had. All right, well, hey Clay, thank you so much. I could keep going for like 5 more hours, but I know we got to get the shoots out here. Mike, JT, appreciate you guys as always, and more so than anyone else, these conversations are unbelievably fun to have, but they're not near as much fun without each and every one of you. All you guys that tune in, guys and gals that tune in each week and support us, thank you so much. Remember, click like, click share, click subscribe. Help us spread the gospel of drag racing, and make sure you go out and support your local racetrack. That's something that I think we probably don't talk about enough right here on this show, is how important it is that we put our money where our mouth is. And go to these racetracks, the ones that before we get bent out of shape about the next one closing down, let's make sure that we cast our vote with our wallet. You got anything else, Clay? I know you got a bunch of stuff going on, but I guess we'll see you in Chicago.
Absolutely. Me and Donna will be loading up the motorhome here shortly. And I want to leave y'all with one last thing, because we're just coming off of Mother's Day. And earlier in this whole craziness, we were talking about, Jeff Lutz, Justin Swanstrom, and, how did we get to where we're at, and how have I done this for 25 years? And this is straight, to quote Wes, straight from, your mouth to God's ears. This is straight from my mama's mouth to all of y'all's ears. If you want to do something, you got to have the want to. When people would ask Mama, how did he get to where he's at? How does he done this? How does he continue to do it? You got to have the want to. That lady fixing to open up her own haircutting shop, You just got to have the want to. You got to want to do it worse than breathing. And if you want to do it, you can make it happen. So those of you racers out there that are watching this, if you got enough want to, I'm 25 years in and I still want to.
Thank you for sharing that. I have goosebumps from head to toe. Mic drop moment, but I want to leave you with this as well. I watched the ACM Awards. I'm going to butcher, like the American Country Music Awards or whatever, that happened over the weekend, right down the road from me in Frisco, Texas. Over there, it's one of Jerry Jones's big palatial estates. Anyways, Lainey Wilson wins an award, I think, like Female Artist of the Year. This like massively strong, huge, like taking off a country music artist. And she said, as she accepted her award, and this is like a tattoo if you've ever wanted one, if you're going to be a dreamer, you better be a doer. And I thought, you know what? Truer words have never been spoken. And Clay, to your point, one of the things we talk about here at Drag Illustrated a lot is we've had a whole lot of people over the years be like, hey, man, I kind of like to moonlight for you guys, or like get a little side hustle. And I never let them happen because they don't work. Because when you have other options and when you have other priorities, you're never going to put this priority where it belongs. And everybody that's been successful here at Drag Illustrated, and I think everybody's that's ever been successful out in the world, it's been rooted in the fact that they had to be, right? They had to be. They had to be. And it's so funny, like our beloved Van Abernathy here, been a part of Drag Illustrated for, I don't know, 15 years. He spends his days traveling the highways and byways of America, you know, showing up at drag strips and selling subscriptions to this magazine. Early on, I had a slew of people see what Van was doing and say that they wanted to do it. Hey, man, I've got a local track and there's a bunch of tracks near me or whatever. I'd like to try that. And early on, I'd let them, right? But nobody had any success. These guys would call me. I sold 5. Van would call me and tell me he sold 150, right? And I go, what's the difference? Oh, Van has to. This is his only job. It's his only source of income. If he doesn't make this work, he doesn't eat. And that was the difference. All those other dudes that tried, they had full-time jobs. They had other programs, right? They didn't have to have it work. But when you have to have it work, hell, man, maybe you're the next Clay Millican. Clay, thank you so much, man. Congratulations, guys. Let's 25 years as a pro drag racer. I mean, that is a legend, man. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, buddy. And I look forward to seeing you at the next one, okay?
I appreciate you guys so much. I always enjoy it and look forward to the next one for sure.
Thanks, brother.